First, I'd like to say this is a great book. Benet Brandreth has done a fantastic job at explaining what rhetoric is all about and how Shakespeare uses it. Benet is a top commercial barrister in the City of London, and the rigour that he must bring to his work in commercial law has undoubtedly been brought to this book. And I'm sure someone like the great theatre director Sam Mendes would get value out of it. Now, I've been reading books on public speaking for most of my life. I've been working as a professional speechwriter for 20 years, and for the past 18 months I've been making an intensive study of classical and Renaissance rhetoric, and I've really enjoyed getting to grips with this book. You can see that I've got lots of fluorescent highlighting and pencil underlining. Now, why should you make the effort to get through this book? Well, the historian Quentin Skinner pointed out that rhetoric was the elite education for young men in the Renaissance. Machiavelli, Dante, Shakespeare, Cervantes, they all studied rhetoric. It was a linguistic education. Now, they thought this was important because, as Benjamin Disraeli said many centuries later, with words we govern men. Now, you might think, oh, we've outgrown it, science is important now, but I'm not so sure. As Brandreth says, this system helps us think in a manageable way about what would otherwise be infinite, the scope of human thought. And for those who say Shakespeare was then, we do things differently now, I would remind you that Shakespeare is still the most produced playwright in the world 400 years after his death. Rhetoric is a theory of creative composition. You can see it at work in art, in music, in architecture, in advertising, any creative pursuit. Some aspects of rhetoric are general knowledge. You've probably heard of ethos, pathos, and logos. These terms refer to the character of the speaker, the reasoning used in the arguments, and the emotional appeals. Brandreth provides excellent definitions of these concepts, which are hard to grasp. Logos, for instance, is the process of reasoning towards truth, in the expectation that truth compels people to action. Now, if you think truth compels, try saying to a friend you know is drinking a bit too much, "John, I think you may have a bit of a drink problem." I would guess that in most cases you'll get a very hostile response, even if it's blindingly obvious to you and John's friends that you're telling the truth. That gives you an idea of how far the truth compels most human beings. Then there is ethos. I notice from Benet Brandreth QC's Twitter feed, he has stated during the pandemic that all his followers should get the COVID vaccination. As Benet says in this book, if we feel we can trust ethos, then we can offload the hard work of thinking for ourselves onto the speaker and simply agree with him. After all, if we can trust Benet with our legal case in the courts of Luxembourg, if we can trust him on Shakespeare and rhetoric, why not trust him on the complexities of molecular biology? And then there is pathos. Brandreth is good on this. He shows how this is conveyed through images and stories. Pathos is when we're persuaded to feel anger, indignation, and disgust. The mantra of Boris Johnson in his general election victory was, "Let's get Brexit done." During the campaign, he drove a vehicle through a wall of bricks with "Get Brexit Done" written on them. It keys into that feeling. I don't want to listen to logos anymore. I'm fed up with the ethos of those people who say we need to continue the debate and reconsider the consequences Just give me the satisfaction of it being over. That's pathos. It's not rational, it's emotional. Let's be honest, persuasion is a mucky business. It's not often that we do the right thing for the right reasons. That's why Shakespeare gets so much mileage out of this in his tragedies, comedies, and histories. Now, for most of my career as a speechwriter, I would have played with these persuasive strategies intuitively. And that's probably what you do when you write a speech. If a client said that it wasn't right, I'd just change the speech and send it back until it was. But by becoming aware of these linguistic techniques that Brandreth describes in this book, I can think more deeply about what I do. The second half of Benet's book describes figures of speech like chiasmus and congeries. We use these techniques unconsciously, but when Benet identifies them, we become conscious of how we use them and how they're applied by politicians and in adverts and in films. When you're conscious of using them, you become aware of why they are powerful. In drama, characters seek to persuade each other of things. They also have internal dialogues with themselves. We watch Iago in Othello. He's going to dupe Othello and ruin his reputation, his marriage, and his peace of mind. It's painful to watch how he succeeds. Brandreth shows us how Iago does it. The psychology behind the language, the strategy, and the tactics. Word order, rhyme, grammatical arrangement. These techniques reveal character. Brandreth uses a speech by Obama to illustrate how these techniques still work to this day. The linguistic education that Shakespeare had was focused on becoming sensitive to the richness and subtlety of language. One of his school textbooks had a task of writing the same sentence, "I was delighted to receive your letter," in 150 different ways. The purpose of doing this was to realise that each different combination had a different shade of meaning. That means how we speak reveals what's going on in our heads, and human beings use what we say to judge us. Like when we watch programmes like BBC Question Time, we nod, we wince, we groan, we sneer, or we cheer for the speakers, depending on how they present their arguments. Rhetorical studies gives you a detachment. When you find an advert you like or a politician you agree with, you can ask yourself, what's going on here? Why do I like this? Is it her ethos, the logos, or the pathos? When we ask these questions, we uncover more depth and meaning behind what's being said. So going back to the book, why should you read, learn, and inwardly digest this theory or set of conventions that Shakespeare clearly was aware of and his audience were aware of too? Well, I think you should do this because even if you get the absolute basics, it will improve your work. Because this theory has survived over 2,500 years. It's much richer and easier to apply than most contemporary alternatives. Rhetoric provides you with a checklist so you can create your own compositions. I'll now set out the 5 canons of rhetoric as I've understood them in this book. These are the steps whereby you construct a speech. 1. Invention. Invention is the identification and generation of good arguments. If you're making a speech about a policy you want people to adopt in the future, the rule book says we should be asking, how does what we're proposing guarantee security and honour? Invention is concerned with the question of what matters to the person who is to be persuaded. You need to think about who you're speaking to. That's your content. Then we get disposition or arrangement. That's simple rules like you need a beginning, a middle, and an end. Brandreth, as a lawyer, is interested in forensic rhetoric, winning a case, guilty or not guilty. And a court scene is a feature of Othello, Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Juliet, and many more. Disposition is the way you structure your case to persuade the jury. That means getting their attention, coming over as modest and making them like you. Brandreth defines it thus: rhetoric provides a method for breaking apart the words and understanding the structure and the flow of the argument. The third canon is style. You've got your content, you've got your template to put your arguments in order, then you have to be aware of the style. This is the choice of words and the order that you place your words and sentences in. Ask yourself, how can I make it sound more musical, more amusing, or more striking? That's what Shakespeare does. He writes these extraordinary speeches that people still want to listen to 400 years later. And that may be because he learnt in school that he might have to try 150 ways of writing the same idea before he comes up with the right combination. The fourth canon is memory. You've got to think, how do I create stories that stick in people's minds? That means vivid imagery. The mind can remember pictures. Once you've seen Gloucester have his eyes gouged out by Regan and Cornwall, you're not going to forget it. Or the slaughter of Macduff's family on stage, or the pornographic insults Iago directs at Othello. If something's not memorable to you, it's unlikely to be memorable to your audience. The fifth canon is delivery. Brandreth includes exercises in the book so you can act out the speeches, applying the rhetorical insights. Remember that when a character speaks, it's not just a statement with an attitude. The characters have relationships with each other, and the rhetoric reveals how they react to each other in the moment. So there you have it, a 5-step process. Invention, find the arguments that the audience will be receptive to. Arrangement, order them in the most persuasive way. 3, style, rewrite the sentences so they come across as simple and easy to understand. Then memory, try and memorize your text, and if some paragraphs and sentences are tedious, forget about them. Finally, delivery. That's what I'm doing now. Act it out and you'll find that you end up cutting and deleting lots of different bits. Now, there are lots of things to say about the 5 canons of rhetoric, and over 247 pages, Brandreth explains the subtleties. So I'll say again, why do you need to know this stuff? Wherever we have a relationship with others, we're using rhetoric. Rhetoric is the manufacture of fides, Latin for faith. As I mentioned earlier, truth on its own does not compel people. It needs to be amplified and supported by authority and emotion. We haven't got time to evaluate most of the things that go on around us. We just put our faith in certain things. That may be God, vaccines, the Labour Party, Donald Trump, Black Lives Matter, Greta Thunberg. We put our faith in causes and people because we instinctively identify with them. Rhetoric gives us a way of understanding why we believe. Bennett's book shows you how Shakespeare, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, put together his speeches and plays. Shakespeare shows us how human beings use language to seduce, to govern, to deceive, to inspire, to plead, and express the depths of the human soul. By studying the plays and their rhetorical construction, we can understand our own psychology better and the psychology of others better. we become aware. These insights are the bedrock of legal argument, preaching, psychotherapy, selling, public relations, politics, screenwriting. I could go on. For that reason, it's worth buying and studying this book.